Good morning, my dear students. Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the second session of the topic. The topic name is Data Sources Imported with Power Query, Data Cleaned, Transformed, and Loaded, and Microsoft Dataverse Datasets. First, we need to talk about the import data sources with Power Query. In order to ingest data into customer insights, you have to decide how to collect it. The amount of data transformation required depends on factors like the volume of data being ingested. Importing data is usually the best option when you need to transform a lot of data or connecting to sources that aren't on the common data model here. As a Power Query is used, the import option is the most flexible because the Power Query lets you reshape data from hundreds of data sources using Microsoft data connectivity and data preparation technology. You can just check it out the what Power Query is here and what's a Power Query. There are around 40 connectors to connect to Excel, Oracle, OData, Azure, and much more. So I have pasted here in the screenshot of the sample. You should note that when you import data, it's copied into customer insights. There are there may be a need for extra storage depending on how much data there is. It's important to make sure you can access the data you want to import because different connectors may require different configurations. And the customer insights uses Power Query, but not all connectors Power Query supports let you bring data into customer insights. So depending on which connector you choose, and you will have a different options. The connectors or capabilities are available for Power Query. So the next one is we need to discuss about the transforming data. A big advantage of using Power Query for importing data is that you can transform it. To use a statistical test or method, data needs to be transformed into an appropriate form. To make sure the customer insight features like activities and measures can use data appropriately, and data usually needs to be transformed here, you will need at least one data field in the data set if you are going to use a data set for activities. For example, we can say here for fields that might be used in calculations or as measures, like calculating the total cost, you would need a numerical field here. You can change configuration settings like the delimiter used during import based on the data source you choose. So before you start your transforming process, you can tweak some of these settings in the preview area. Even though every situation will be different, there are a few standard steps you need to follow. Here's what you should do. The number one is headers should be the first row here. You can use the first row of CSV files as the header informations. If you are ingesting data from one, you can use the first row as data or headers by choosing transform table. Second step is just to follow about the make sure your data is in a standard format, understand, because a data can be mapped to the common data model in customer insights. To facilitate data interoperability, the common data model like a CDM is a standard and extensible collection of schemes like entities, attributes, relationships. So that schemas that represent business concepts and activities. The entities include accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, products, etc. Then go to the map to standard and map fields from your source data to common data model fields. And next will be on a field data types need to be changed. Yes, exactly, because an associated data type will be assigned to each field. So next we need to talk about here's more about the data types are available in the customer insights. And the data insights types affect how items are used and tracked in customer insights. As we talked about earlier in the earlier presentation, you might not be able to create your activities or measures if you don't define data types correctly. So depending on where you are in the process, you can just adjust this later, but it could lead to a lot more configurations. So spend some time making sure every item has the right data type. I will give an example here. The table represents an example of a transaction table containing data from purchases made on a company's website. The ID of the customer who made the purchase date, and the price all there. To make sure the data from this table can be used appropriately, or we need to assign the right data type to the right fields here. Let's see the data types for the fields like this. Customer ID means since this is a text field, we can leave it as is. We will probably use this field to represent time frames, so we will want it to be set to a data type and a date type here. So according to the date, stores only the date of the transaction. Data time remembers when the purchase was made. Dates, times, and time zones are stored here due to the fact that we only need to store it as a date, it can be set to date here, the process. And you would probably set this to currency to represent a dollar amount. Make sure everything is set up correctly, because especially if you are connected to a text-based source model. In the data transformation process, it's possible to make mistakes like defining the wrong data type. On the right hand side of the edit query screen, the applied steps, actions, and some of the section tracks the changes you make to the dataset process. If your steps didn't work, you can just edit or remove them from the applied steps. So next we need to talk about the data cleanup and transformations and loading mode. And you can shape data in customer insight using Power Query's data transformation capabilities to get the best experience. Choosing the Power Query connector, identifying the data source, and connecting to it will allow you to start shaping your data. Open the Power Query Designer by selecting Transform Data at the bottom level. This is a sample image where I have pasted here. Next we'll be on to make sure you know what the headers and names of the columns are. In order to shape your initial data, you need to identify the column headings and names, then evaluate where they are located to make sure they are in the right place. In Power Query Editor, all data is assumed to belong in table rows. It's possible for a data source to have a first row with column names. In order to fix this, you need to promote the first row of the table into a column header. There are two ways to promote headers. On the home tab, just to check it out, check use first row as headers. You can use the first row as headers by selecting the drop down button next to column 1. This is a sample image where I have pasted here. You can just check it out, the copy preview data, use a first row as headers, add custom column and add conditional column and index column. So this is a sample. And next one is we need to talk about you can rename the column process, because you might find that one or more columns don't make sense, have spelling errors, or just aren't user friendly as your data comes in. When that happens, you can rename the columns. There are two ways to rename the columns. Right click on the column header and select rename, and simply double click on the column header and replace the name with the correct one. So next one is get rid of the columns. Getting rid of unnecessary column is a big part of data shaping, because when you have established relationships between your tables, it's best to remove columns early rather than later. Columns can be removed two ways. Remove the columns you don't want. Select remove the column from the home tab. Make sure you keep the columns you want. Go to the home tab and select remove columns and remove other columns here. So what about you change the type of data in the column mode, because the customer insights let you do different things with the data based on what's stored in your columns. For example, if you are creating a segment to identify customers who are within a specific age range, the data with column needs to be formatted as a date. Otherwise, the system can't use the data expressions to figure out the customer's age. It's also important when you are planning to do calculations like figuring out how much someone spent here. There is no reason to worry if the data type is wrong at first. And CSV or text files, for instance, are likely to have text data types assigned to all columns. So don't forget to make sure each column has the right data types. It's possible to modify the data and the two types of data model here. The first thing you have to do is select the column with the problem. You can get the right data type from the transform tab by selecting the data type drop down on the home ribbon here. So next one is we need to discuss about integrate with the common data model. According to the process, as we saw in the previous session, Power Query is ideally for importing data that might need ETL like extract, transform and load before consumption exactly. But when working with less than 5 million records, Power Query is also a good option here. You can also connect to a common data model to ingest data. Power Query can't handle the small or larger data volumes, but common data models are great for scenarios with the ETL like extract, transform and load process. And according to the get connected to a common data models means a data ingesting from a common data model starts the name, and the same way as any other model method here, you will need these things to connect to a common data model. Name of the account, a key for accessing, and a container mode. You need a container mode. So what about the connect to the Microsoft Dataverse we need to discuss. And customer insights can ingest the customer profile or activity related data from Microsoft Dataverse instances used by Dynamics 365 applications like sales, customer service and marketing. For example, you can ingest opportunity or case information that is displayed on the customer profile screen as customer activities. You may also have some extra information on the contact entity that should be included here. And admins in the Dataverse organizations can easily connect to their analytics entities in the Dataverse managed lake with customer insights, regardless of what data they need, because the Dataverse can be used for small and big data volumes, just like we discussed in the common data model session on the previous session. You should use your Azure Data Factory or Databricks for extract, transform, and load model like a ETL process. Okay, before you use Dataverse, here's what you should know. You can understand the process because this is a final model. And the same way that a common data model folder doesn't copy data into customer insights, a Dataverse doesn't here. When you connect, you will need to give the server address for your Dataverse group. You will get a different address depending on where you live. To connect your Dataverse instance in the United States, your server URL might be http://instance name.crm.dynamics.com. So connect with an account that has administrative right to the Dataverse instance. You can select the entities you want to ingest once you have authenticated to the data source. If some entities are already selected, it's probably because Dynamics 365 Sales Insights is using them. Selections can't be modified here. Once the data source is created, the entities will be available there. Because when you save your data source, it starts syncing the selected entities to Dataverse Managed Lake. It's only possible to use the same Dataverse Managed Lake from one data source at any time. This is a sample, a screenshot where I have pasted here. The common data services, you can just check it out. The entity, account, action code, activity attachment, activity party, activity pointer, annotation, and app model. This is a review entities a screenshot. Okay, my dear students, I hope you have enjoyed the second session of the topic data sources imported with Power Query, data cleaned, transformed, and loaded, Microsoft Dataverse datasets also we have explained here. Thank you once again, and thank you all.